Back it up, old man. This area's for soldiers, not museum exhibits. The words shot across the hangar like a flare, bright and brutal, loud enough to stall movement mid-step. A few heads turned, others didn't bother. The speaker, a sharp-jawed sergeant with a clipboard under one arm and far too much pride under the other, was already closing the distance, boots snapping against the floor. Bruce Keegan had just stepped across the painted yellow boundary line, toolbox in hand, 1 foot onto the marked zone beneath the comms relay unit. He wasn't moving fast. Time had taken a toll on his knees. But he was steady, determined, focused. He'd been asked to take a look at a failing circuit, a volunteer favor to the base he still showed up to every Thursday morning, badge or not. But the badge was missing today. The routine had slipped, and the eyes that usually overlooked him had landed and judged. I said back, up. The sergeant's tone cut like sheet metal. Then came the shove. Not hard enough to drop a man, but hard enough to make a point. Bruce staggered back a step. His boots scraped slightly on the concrete. The toolbox tilted and struck the ground with a hollow clank. One of the latches popped open, a small socket wrench skittering out across the floor. He didn't bend down to retrieve it. He didn't speak. Just stared at the sergeant with a look that didn't match the moment. Not anger, not fear, just patience. The kind of patience worn into a man's bones by decades of dirt roads, dead radios, and broken machinery under fire. The sergeant scoffed. If you need a walker to change a fuse, maybe stick to fixing lawnmowers. Laughter echoed behind him. One of the younger privates let out a sharp, nervous snort. Another elbowed a buddy and whispered, "Somebody's grandpa got lost again." A phone camera came up, recording. No one stopped it. The air felt heavier now, the kind of quiet that comes just before a storm. From somewhere deeper in the hangar, a pair of boots stopped walking. A hand paused mid-lift of a coffee cup. A voice, calm and cold, sliced through the growing noise. "Sergeant, that man outranks you." Quietly. The sergeant blinked. He turned, but the speaker wasn't visible yet. Bruce didn't move, didn't explain, didn't defend himself. He just slowly bent down and picked up the wrench. And someone had been watching. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. The toolbox rattled gently against Bruce Keegan's thigh as he walked back toward the electrical housing unit. The same one he'd repaired 3 times over the past year, quietly, without pay, without being asked twice. At 83, his steps were slower than they once were, but steady, deliberate. The faded canvas of his old field jacket moved stiffly with each motion, brushed at the elbows, threadbare at the cuffs, but clean, always clean. The smell of steel and diesel filled the air around him, a scent he'd known longer than most of the men in that hangar had been alive. He didn't look at the sergeant again. There was no point. The shouting, the shove, the dropped tool. They belonged to someone else now. The boy wanted attention. Bruce had come to work. His hands, calloused and marked by time, opened the access panel with the ease of memory. A brass ID tag, scratched nearly smooth, swung lightly on the toolbox handle as he set it down. The cloth on which he knelt, folded carefully from an old olive-drab shirt, was placed between bone and cement. Ritual born not of comfort, but discipline. Precision was everything. Even now, Bruce Keegan had been coming to the base every Thursday at 700 for 12 years. Rain, shine, or snow, thick enough to bury tire treads. No assignment, no compensation. Just a quiet call now and then from the quartermaster when something didn't hum quite right. There had been a time, not long ago, when men would stand when he entered the room, when doors opened before he reached them. Now, he passed through unnoticed, a living part of the building's history, like a beam or a wire that had always been there. Today, something had changed. The badge clipped to his jacket, the temporary clearance tag, had been left on the hook by his back door at home. His eyes had grown dim enough in recent years that he hadn't even noticed until halfway through the gate. The young woman at reception, too green to recognize him and too nervous to ask questions, waved him through with a shrug, after a 10-minute wait and a phone call that no one answered. But inside the hangar, things were less forgiving. The training day had brought in newer faces, fresh uniforms, stiff boots, voices still loud with authority they hadn't earned yet. It was the kind of environment where a man like Bruce stood out, and not for the right reasons. He could feel the eyes behind him now as he worked. Not curious, not concerned. Watching like you'd watch a misplaced object in the wrong room. Something out of place. The socket set clicked softly as he loosened the relay casing. Each movement of his fingers came with a pause. Not from hesitation, but because the joints no longer did what they used to without permission. Still, he worked cleanly, quietly, like always. The sergeant, somewhere nearby, was still pacing. His voice had dropped now, but the words carried, just enough to sting. I don't care what patch he wore 40 years ago. Doesn't give him clearance. He could have shorted the entire panel. A few others mumbled agreement. One joked something about relics doing rewiring. Another laughed too loud. Bruce adjusted the interior wiring, his brow furrowed, not at the noise, but at the fray in a cable that hadn't been listed in the report. That was the sort of detail that mattered. Not voices, not stares, not the erosion of respect that had crept into places like this over the years like rust along a beam. His fingers brushed across the solder joint, still warm, poorly done. Someone had tried to fix it earlier and failed. Sloppy work. Bruce Keegan, a voice had said once long ago during a field inspection after a failed radio relay in heavy weather. If the job's not done right, it's not done. Period. That voice belonged to the old chief mechanic at Fort Bragg, a man who'd made Bruce rip out an entire panel just to redo a single line of wiring. The lesson stuck. It always did. He sat back for a moment, wiping his hands on a folded rag from the toolbox lid. From behind him came the sound of a heel tapping, slow, impatient. The sergeant again, still watching, still not moving on. A new presence shifted at the far end of the hangar. No movement, just presence. Like the shift of wind before a storm. Bruce didn't look up, but he sensed it. Somewhere, something was starting to change. Not fast, but real. Behind him, more whispers. Someone said, "I think he's done this before." Another replied, "He doesn't look like much." The words weren't cruel, not intentionally, but they carried the weight of judgment just the same. Bruce leaned forward again, hands steady, breath measured. His heart, though slower than it used to be, beat with the same rhythm it always had when he was focused. The same rhythm as Hill 17, as the convoy in the North Pass, as the storm in 72 when the antenna blew, and he worked for 9 hours in the mud to bring the radio back to life. He didn't expect them to know that. He didn't expect anyone to know that. But still, it mattered. The panel was stubborn. A corroded contact had fused near the base of the primary relay, and Bruce had to rock it gently with a flathead before it gave a grudging click. The metal was cold, even in the warmth of the hangar, and his fingers ached as he worked it loose. He reached into the box for a cloth-wrapped bundle, carefully unrolling a set of older, well-used tools. Each one was wrapped in a piece of worn green canvas, stitched with initials long faded by time. These were tools not just kept, they were carried through decades, passed through stations, posts, and years. He crouched lower, knees stiff beneath the weight of a frame that once moved like wind over sand, now creaking under the demand of service one more time. His breath came steady, but slightly audible. Each inhale pulled past lungs once filled with dust storms and diesel smoke. He moved like a man who no longer needed to think about what wire went where. The work lived in his hands. It lived in his memory. But every movement cost something. Behind him, the buzz of conversation continued. He could hear it, not in words, but in tone, the kind of low, unchecked ridicule shared between men who hadn't yet learned what silence can teach. One soldier, leaning against a support beam, smirked as he muttered something under his breath. Another, crouching to tighten a gear assembly, shook his head in quiet amusement. From across the hangar, the sergeant's voice returned, not loud, but loud enough. "Look at this one. Takes 10 minutes just to bend over. More chuckles. A boot scraped against the floor in mock imitation. Someone pretended to shuffle with a limp, drawing laughter from a nearby trio. No one told them to stop. No one corrected. The air carried it all, like smoke that wouldn't rise. Bruce did not respond. He remained bent over, adjusting the coil housing with a small pick tool, his expression unreadable. There was no hurry in his motion, no desire to defend or explain. Just the task. The task was everything. A socket slipped from the box, rolling a few inches before coming to rest against the base of a chair leg. A young private, not more than 20, glanced down at it and instinctively bent to pick it up. His hand hovered. He hesitated. Then the sergeant's voice, clipped and immediate, cut the moment short. "That's not your job, Private. Go tighten something that matters." The private stiffened, pulled back his hand, and rose without a word. Bruce, still kneeling, didn't look up. He simply reached to the side, slow and steady, fingers brushing along the concrete until they found the tool. He drew it back to him like a fisherman pulling line. The concrete beneath him was cool, speckled with decades of stains, oil, sweat, rust. His knees throbbed now, a low heat pulsing beneath the skin. He shifted slightly, weight leaning on his left hand, pausing just long enough to draw a deep breath before returning to the wires. He twisted two together, secured them, and smoothed the connection with a wrap of black tape that had long lost its stick, but still held like it meant something. From the far corner, a higher-ranking officer glanced over. A man in his 40s with thinning hair and the tired look of someone more used to paperwork than confrontation. He watched the scene for a moment, his hand resting near his belt buckle, then looked away, pretending to read a checklist on his clipboard. He said nothing. Bruce moved on to the second panel, one that required him to rise, reposition, and crouch again in a new place. The act was harder this time. His hand gripped the edge of the unit for balance as he stood, the joints in his back clicking softly with the effort. He didn't groan. He didn't wince. But his breathing changed slightly, shallower, measured. He repositioned the cloth beneath him once more, lowering himself into the new stance like a man who'd learned how to spread pain evenly across a failing body. The soldiers nearby watched, but without kindness. One of them leaned in toward the sergeant and spoke with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Is this guy even certified? Looks like he's fixing a coffee machine." Another added, louder this time, "Don't touch anything important, Gramps." A laugh cracked the air, short, sharp, cruel. Bruce's hands did not falter. He removed the faulty connector, replaced it with a fitting from his own collection, a tiny silver piece nestled in felt. He tapped it twice with a thin rubber mallet, then secured it with a slow, precise twist of a hex key. The movement was ritual, familiar, untouched by mockery. The overhead light flickered once, then again. He paused. Something in the current was fighting him. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, forehead glistening slightly with the effort of focus. Not confusion, not doubt, focus. In the silence that followed, one of the soldiers across the room dropped a tool, the clatter breaking through the stale laughter. Another's voice rose slightly, but faded when no one answered. Even the sergeant seemed to grow quieter, as though the weight of the moment was shifting without warning. Bruce, still kneeling, still working, adjusted the final connector and secured it with a thick strip of cloth-bound tape. He placed it carefully, sealing it with a thumb press that held a kind of reverence, like a man closing a letter to someone who would never read it. The panel buzzed softly now, alive. He sat back once more, stretching one leg forward to ease the pressure. The cloth beneath him was now damp at the edges, not from the concrete, but from the heat in his body. He rested his hands on his thighs for a moment, his eyes watching the relay hum back to life. And still, no one stood. The toolbox lid had begun to slide, loosened slightly by the earlier shove. As Bruce rose from his kneeling position, the edge caught the metal hinge, and the sound of a small socket falling echoed louder than it should have in the growing silence. The piece spun on the floor once, twice, before rolling just out of reach, disappearing beneath a folding bench leg where two soldiers sat idle, cleaning their weapons more for show than need. Bruce looked at it, then down at his hands, coated in a light sheen of dust and engine grease. He reached to steady himself, his palm pressing against the cold concrete, knees bent awkwardly beneath him. The stretch would hurt. He knew that. But the tool wasn't just a tool. It was his set, his responsibility. He reached forward. As he did, the sergeant's boot crossed his line of sight. The young man, jaw clenched tight and lips curled into a grin that barely passed for a smirk, stepped deliberately between Bruce and the tool. Then, without a word, he dragged the toe of his boot forward and kicked the socket farther away. A small act, done slowly, intentionally, with the kind of casual cruelty reserved for those certain no one would stop them. The sound of the metal scraping against the concrete drew the attention of the nearby soldiers, who now sat in quiet amusement. The sergeant let out a scoff as he turned slightly toward his companions. "Need a hand, hero? Or are those medals just for decoration?" No one laughed right away. It wasn't hesitation, just the kind of pause that asked silently how far this was going to go. Then the first chuckle came, a short, biting one. Another followed, louder, echoed by someone standing near the folding chairs. The moment ignited. The cruelty fed itself. Bruce remained crouched, one hand now pressed to the ground for balance, his other reaching out again, slower this time, until his fingertips brushed the edge of the socket near the wheel of a dolly. He pulled it back toward him without looking up, not responding to the words, not acknowledging the eyes on him. The sergeant took a step closer. "Maybe we should get you a walker with a socket holder, huh? Something with wheels. I mean, I'd offer to help, but I don't do cosplay Marines." The word cosplay drew louder laughter. Not from everyone. Some stayed quiet, but enough. The kind of laughter that leaves a man isolated in a crowd. Across the hangar, one of the older officers finally stirred. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between concern and discomfort. But he stepped forward, walking slowly toward the group. His boots struck the floor in quiet, measured taps, each one softened by indecision. He stopped a few feet from the sergeant, glancing down at Bruce without meeting his eyes. He turned to the younger man and spoke low, but firm enough to carry. "Sarge, give him some space." The sergeant didn't turn. "He's in my space, sir. No clearance, no uniform. Just some old man crawling under the radar." The officer held still for a moment, then adjusted the clipboard under his arm and stepped back without another word. Whatever authority he might have carried in that moment evaporated. Bruce stood slowly. He didn't ask for space. He didn't claim it. He simply moved back to his toolbox, closed the lid with a soft click, and unrolled a fresh cloth across the bench where the next tool would rest. The routine remained untouched, not because it didn't hurt, but because it had to. From the far end of the hangar, a group of junior engineers looked over, watching. One of them, a young man with sharp eyes and trembling fingers, whispered something to the man beside him. "Don't mess with him. He's done more than you'll ever know." But the words were quiet, too quiet, lost beneath the scrape of boots and muttered jokes. The sergeant turned back toward the other soldiers, his confidence swelling with the attention. His voice rose again, not in volume, but in edge. "Then he should have stayed in the museum. We don't need antiques doing maintenance on live equipment. I don't care how many fairy tales you heard about the good old days." This time, there was no laughter, just stillness, a crack in the rhythm. Bruce did not speak. His hands, weathered and steady, picked up a cloth-wrapped voltmeter from the top of the box and returned to the relay casing. His movements didn't change. His pace remained slow, purposeful. The work, as always, deserved better than the noise around it. But behind him, the atmosphere had changed, not yet in his defense, but something had shifted, a discomfort, a pressure in the air that made certain eyes dart to corners, to exits, to the shadowed places where authority sometimes watched in silence. And still, the old technician, the soldier once known, now overlooked, did not flinch. The panel responded under Bruce's hands with a soft vibration. the low hum of current returning to form. He pressed his palm gently against the side casing, feeling the warmth begin to rise from within, a sign that the connection had taken. No sparks, no overload. Just function, clean and sound. His eyes narrowed as he watched the diode flicker once, then settle into a steady pulse. It was the same kind of steady that Bruce had chased his whole life, in circuits, in missions, in men. He shifted slightly on his knees, his weight pressing into the folded cloth he had placed to shield bone from concrete. His breathing was measured, silent, but for the faint catch at the top of his inhale, where old injury still lived in his rib cage. His left shoulder ached from years of carrying more weight than it should have. His right wrist clicked quietly every time he turned it, a gift from a convoy explosion overseas, one no one ever put in the papers. He flexed it once, then returned to the task. Pain was familiar. Pain was a companion that didn't ask questions. He took a small brass-handled screwdriver from the box and twisted the retaining screws with even pressure, pausing every few turns to ensure balance. He didn't rush. Every movement had its place. Even his stillness seemed deliberate. Around him, the buzz of laughter had dulled to an uncertain murmur, the kind that filled space when people didn't know whether to continue or to retreat. But Bruce didn't acknowledge it. His eyes remained on the panel, his mind somewhere deeper, not in memory, but in habit. He folded the cloth again, shifted position, and began tightening the upper bolts. His hands trembled faintly at the edges, but the tremble never reached the work. The bolts slid into place with that particular resistance of old machines long since forgotten by budget upgrades. Bruce made no comment. He simply adjusted and continued. When one bolt refused to thread cleanly, he reached for a thread chaser he had kept in that box since the 1980s. A small, precise tool that most men half his age wouldn't recognize. The teeth bit, cleared the path, and the bolt went home. From across the hangar, the sergeant had grown quieter, though he lingered. His stance had shifted. Less aggressive now, more performative. His arms were crossed, but his posture was looser, as if trying to convince himself of a point he no longer believed. His voice didn't return. Not yet. Bruce wiped his hands slowly with a cotton rag, folding it once, then twice, as he had done thousands of times before. The motion was exact, almost ceremonial. He replaced the tool back in its carved space in the box, snapped the latch shut, and ran his fingers lightly across the surface of the panel, checking for warmth, for hum, for life. The machine responded. Steady, strong. He reached for the panel's exterior cover and lifted it with both hands, slotting it gently into place. The screws on the top edge were worn, threadbare from years of use. But he adjusted his grip, cradled the plate as though it were glass, and set it in with a softness that stood in sharp contrast to the hardness of the room around him. A private, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably. His eyes had followed every motion, but now they dropped to the floor, guilt softening his face. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence said enough. Bruce took a final glance at the diagnostics, noting the stable readout, then stepped back and adjusted the line of his jacket, a habit from years of inspections, long after they were required. His expression remained calm. Not proud, not hurt, just calm. It was the kind of calm forged in years of learning not to waste breath on explanation. Behind him, the laughter had stopped completely. Not by reprimand, not by order. It had simply faded. The space it left behind was heavier than noise. Near the far entrance of the hangar, behind a line of partially assembled gear crates, a figure stood quietly, his posture still, his gaze locked on the man kneeling by the panel. He held a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His eyes didn't blink often. He was watching something he recognized, something most of the room had missed. Bruce turned toward his box, lifted the handle, and slid the toolbox 2 inches closer to his knee. Then he sat back, resting both hands on his thighs. Not out of exhaustion, but out of finality. The work was done. He had said everything he needed to say, without saying a word. The lights above the relay buzzed once, softly, then settled into a quiet glow. Everything was working. Everything was whole. And across the room, still and silent, a general who had not touched his coffee was watching. The general hadn't moved from his place near the equipment crates, but his presence had begun to change the room. He stood like part of the architecture, unmoving, unnoticed by many, yet undeniable once seen. His face, lined with time and weather, remained passive, not cold, not warm, just still, like the sea before a storm. His hands rested loosely at his sides, one still holding the coffee cup, now untouched, forgotten. The other slowly curled into a subtle grip, not from anger, but from memory. General Mason Clark had worn the uniform longer than some of the men in that hangar had been alive. His retirement 6 months earlier had done little to soften the instincts still alive beneath the surface. Logistics advisor was the title now. Civilian clothes, less saluting. But no matter what the badge read, men still moved differently when he entered a room, unless they were too young to know his name. His name, however, wasn't what had his attention now. His gaze stayed locked on Bruce, studying every motion, the way he handled the tools, the way he refolded the cloth, the way he placed the panel with precision more akin to ceremony than repair. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation, only practiced calm, the kind a man only gained through years in environments where a moment's panic could cost lives. Clark's jaw flexed, the faintest hint of something tightening beneath the skin. He saw it clearly now, not just the work, but the man inside it. The name hadn't clicked when he walked in. Bruce had changed since they last stood in the same place, back when both had color in their beards and speed in their stride. But the hands hadn't changed. Clark would know that grip anywhere. Firm, calculated, always just tight enough to mean something. A younger officer approached the general from the side, clipboard in hand, starting to speak, but paused when he saw the older man stare. He followed the line of sight, confused for a moment, then whispered, "Do you want me to clear him out? He's not on the list for today's drill." Clark didn't answer. He didn't even glance at the officer. He simply lifted the coffee to his lips and sipped, cold now, bitter, and returned the cup to its place beside him. He watched the sergeant instead. The young man had shifted again. His jaw was less sharp now, his stance slightly uncertain. He stood near the row of folding chairs, posture open in the way of someone who didn't realize they were being evaluated. He looked toward Bruce, then glanced around the room, seeking faces that would echo his own. None did. Their expressions were flat now, curious, some unsure, one or two uncomfortable. Clark's gaze moved back to Bruce, then to the toolbox. He remembered it. Not the make or model, but that damn leather wrap around the handle. Bruce had tied it himself decades ago in the Middle East, after the original grip shredded during a 3-day sandstorm. The younger techs had laughed about it then, calling it the world's saddest toolbox. But that wrap had never frayed, not once, still hadn't. And the way Bruce had handled that relay, Clark had seen him do the same thing under fire once, when they were stranded without comms near the southern line, the radio half melted from a faulty power core. He had worked through gunfire, through heat, through the kind of silence only known to men who didn't know if they'd survive the next 5 minutes. And still, Bruce had gotten the signal up. Saved half of Echo Company with a busted Jeep and a rusted radio. Clark muttered under his breath, the words barely audible even to himself. The officer beside him blinked. "Sir?" Clark waved him off with a single small motion. His eyes didn't leave Bruce. Not now. Not yet. Something was happening here. A moment had begun, and Clark knew better than to interrupt it before it revealed itself. His silence wasn't hesitation. It was preparation. The lights above the workbench flickered once, a faint tremor in the overhead bulbs as the current shifted into balance. Then they steadied. Not bright, not dim, just even. The kind of light that tells you the machine is listening again. Bruce straightened his back slowly, the strain showing only in the brief pause of his breath, then stepped back from the panel. The relay box, once inert and temperamental, now pulsed with clean energy. No sparks, No smoke. No warnings. Just a low, constant hum, the sound of stability. Bruce's hands rested at his sides, still, as though sensing the silence gathering behind him. The sergeant stepped forward again, arms crossed, jaw tight with the false confidence of someone trying to reclaim a room that had started to slip from him. "Took you long enough," he said, voice cutting through the stillness like a dull blade. "You sure that thing's not gonna blow up the next time we flip the switch?" A few soldiers nearby shifted uncomfortably. One coughed. Another looked away, suddenly preoccupied with an empty clipboard. No one laughed. The mockery now echoed in a different space, one no longer willing to receive it. Bruce didn't answer. He bent slightly, picked up a thin piece of wire from the floor, and placed it in a small fabric pouch near his box. His hands moved slowly, with finality, like a craftsman closing the lid on something sacred. His eyes remained focused on the tools. His back was straight. The comment hadn't touched him, but the silence afterward had begun to touch everyone else. Then, from across the hangar, a new pair of boots echoed. Not rushed, not aggressive, just present. General Mason Clark stepped forward, not in uniform, not announced, but the sound of his movement carried weight that years could not erase. No rank on his chest, no need for it. His presence alone shifted the gravity of the space. He walked past the sergeant without acknowledgement, the way a mountain moves past wind. His eyes were on Bruce, nothing else. Reaching the spot where the earlier insult had landed, Clark bent without a word, picked up the small socket that had been kicked, and examined it briefly, not for damage, but for memory. Then quietly, he turned and held it out. Bruce looked up. Their eyes met. No words passed between them. Bruce reached out, took the socket, and gave a faint nod. That was all. But the silence that followed was deeper than any speech. Clark turned to face the room. Not with rage, not with grandstanding, just truth. "If that repair hadn't worked," he said, his voice steady, low but clear enough to reach every wall, "your weekend drill would have ended in a full blackout. That includes comms, power to the emergency shelters, signal relays to the outer range." He paused, letting the silence thicken. "Dead radios, in an active drill. That's not just a mistake, that's failure." The sergeant's face began to lose color, a flush creeping into his ears, but he remained silent. No excuse now would sound anything but hollow. Clark looked around the hangar, not at the ceiling, not at the doors, at the faces, one by one. "Missions don't fail because of bad soldiers," he continued, his voice now holding a quiet edge, like a blade left resting on a table. "They fail because of forgotten ones. The men who show up long after they've been told they're no longer needed. The ones who keep things running, while no one's looking." He turned back to Bruce, then to the panel, humming steadily behind him like a quiet testament to old skill. "You all just watched a man save the mission, while being shoved aside. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound in the hangar now was the low pulse of the machine, steady, like a heart refusing to stop. For a few seconds, the hangar became a church, not by choice, but by gravity. No one spoke, no one shifted. Even the hum of machinery seemed to lower itself in reverence. The only motion came from Bruce, who stood beside the freshly sealed relay panel, wiping his hands on a square of soft cloth. His fingers moved in small circles, not to clean but to finish. A habit built over decades, the final step in 1,000 unseen repairs. No eyes were on the work now. They were on him. General Clark stood nearby, his arms no longer folded, his coffee cup abandoned on a crate behind him. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. His posture was enough, open, firm, quietly protective. He faced Bruce fully now, and the men around them took note of the space that formed between them. It wasn't distance. It was respect. Bruce didn't smile. He didn't nod. But he met the general's eyes, and something flickered there. Recognition. Not of the moment, but of the man. A face aged by war and time, one that had changed like his own had, but still held the same depth behind it. Clark's mouth twitched, not a smile, but something close. His hand rose to his brow, not fast, not theatrical. Just a clean, deliberate salute, crisp and full. Bruce returned it without thought. The motion lived in his bones. Even now, after all the years, it came with precision that no muscle memory could fake. For that brief moment, two men stood at attention for each other. No uniform, no ceremony, just truth. Their eyes didn't break. They didn't need to speak. Every mile, every loss, every inch earned in mud and wire and dust passed between them in silence. It was not camaraderie born of proximity. It was forged through fire, long ago, carried forward by men who kept showing up even after the world had stopped asking. A few feet away, the young private who had earlier tried to help stepped forward. He had watched everything: the disrespect, the silence, the work, the turning tide. His boots scraped lightly as he crossed the floor, careful not to interrupt the invisible line between the two older men. He stood a few steps from Bruce, his voice quiet, careful, almost reverent. "Sir, what's your name again?" Bruce turned his head slowly, studying the private's face. He wasn't young in years, but young in a way that showed in the eyes. Not yet hardened, not yet worn. There was something honest in him, something open. "Keegan," Bruce said, his voice low but clear. Bruce Keegan. The name hung in the air like smoke rising. It carried no boast, no demand, just weight and the echo of something long unspoken. A shift moved through the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't immediate, but it was real. The men who had laughed before now looked toward Bruce with something else in their eyes. Not pity, not shame. Something quieter, something closer to respect. The private nodded once, then stepped back, hands still at his sides, unsure whether to salute or simply hold still. And from the doorway near the far end of the hangar, a technician, one of the engineers who'd whispered before, finally said it aloud, almost under his breath. "I've heard that name." Someone else added, "Yeah, I think my dad knew him." Bruce didn't respond. He reached down, lifted the toolbox with both hands, and waited. The panel behind him glowed steady, humming not just with current, but with meaning. Nothing more needed to be said. The toolbox sat at Bruce's feet, the metal casing dulled from years of touch and time. He stood still beside it, one hand resting lightly on the handle, his shoulders squared not out of pride but discipline. The relay behind him hummed with quiet completion, a job well done. Around him, the men who had watched, judged, now waited, unsure of what to say, or if anything should be said at all. General Clark stepped forward. His boots echoed lightly, each step slow, grounded in purpose rather than haste. He stopped just to Bruce's left, not in front of him, not beside him, just near enough to be seen as a bridge between the room and the man who had fixed it. Clark turned his head slightly toward the others, his voice low but unmistakable, the tone of someone speaking not for attention, but for truth. Bruce Keegan rerouted communications under live fire in Kandahar. 2 radios out, half the unit cut off. They thought it was a lost operation. His words carried weight, not in volume, but in what they unlocked. He crawled through 40 yards of mud and shrapnel to reach the backup relay, took 2 rounds in the shoulder, and still brought signal back online. He didn't even mention the injury until the extraction team showed. The hangar was still. The kind of still that happens only when a myth becomes real in front of you. No one blinked. No one spoke. Clark glanced at Bruce, then back at the men. His voice softened, but sharpened. He got 3 medals. None he asked for. Most of you probably walked by his photo in the Hall of Honor on your way in this morning. You just didn't recognize him without the ribbon rack and the years taken off. The words struck like a slow drumbeat. Eyes shifted. Someone swallowed hard. One of the junior engineers lowered his head slightly, lips pressed together in a tight line. And then, softly, Bruce spoke. Not loud, not rehearsed, just real. "I didn't come here for thanks," he said, his voice dry with age, but steady. Didn't come to remind anyone of what I did. I just didn't want any of you. Going dark. His gaze moved toward the panel, still glowing, still humming, then back to the room. That line goes out during a drill, comms fail, and someone gets hurt. Maybe worse. I'd rather crawl to fix it than hear about one of you getting left behind because a $10 relay wasn't replaced. He paused, not to gather words, but because that was all he needed to say. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was heavy, the weight of realization, of things unacknowledged now made undeniable. The sergeant, the one who had pushed, who had mocked, stood off to the side, no longer postured, no longer armored in tone or stance. His arms were no longer crossed, his chest no longer puffed. He looked not at Bruce, but at the floor between them, as if the words had found something inside him that his rank could not shield. He didn't speak, not yet, but the change had begun. At the far side of the hangar, the young private who had asked Bruce's name earlier lifted his hand slightly, uncertain, then lowered it. His face was different now, open in a way that only respect can form. And near the door, someone quietly closed the camera app on their phone. The screen went black. No one had told them to stop recording. They simply understood now that this moment belonged to someone else, and didn't need to be shared to matter. The name Bruce Keegan had been spoken, but now it had been felt. The hum of the relay panel continued in the background, steady and uninterrupted, like the final note of a hymn long held. Bruce stood motionless beside it, the toolbox still resting near his boot. Around him, the weight of silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of hesitation. It had become something reverent, heavy but not oppressive, full. General Clark turned toward the others, his arms relaxed at his sides, his eyes surveying the room like a man measuring a foundation. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. What had needed saying had already been said, and more importantly, had been understood. What came next wasn't his to deliver with words. It would have to come through action. Near the center of the hangar, the officer who had earlier hesitated now stepped forward. He moved with purpose this time, clipboard forgotten beneath his arm. He crossed the floor slowly, glancing once toward the general, then to Bruce, and finally to the sergeant, who now stood off to the side, his uniform just as sharp as it had been, but somehow smaller. The officer's voice broke the silence, not loud, but firm. "From this point forward," he said, turning so that his words touched every ear in the hangar, "any visiting veteran with a service history tied to base infrastructure or operations is to be given priority personnel status. No clearance delays, no station barriers. Their access is to be respected, because their hands helped build the places we now stand in." A few nods followed. No one questioned it. The officer turned to Bruce, his expression stripped of formality. "We'll make sure your badge reflects that, sir. You won't have to wait at the gate again." Bruce didn't respond right away. His eyes remained still, his face unreadable, but he gave a single nod, slow, deliberate, the kind of nod that accepts respect without needing to lower its guard. Then, from the side, a quieter voice spoke. The sergeant. He stepped forward, his boots now heavy against the concrete. Every movement measured, no longer designed to draw attention. His eyes didn't meet Bruce's immediately. They lingered on the floor, then on the relay box, then finally rose to the man he had shoved earlier that morning. He didn't offer an apology. Not yet. Instead, he said something else. "I've been reassigned to internal communications maintenance starting Monday." His tone carried none of its earlier sharpness. The edges had softened. The volume had dropped. There was no pride in it, only understanding. Bruce studied him for a moment, not judging, but watching. Then, after a pause, he reached down, opened the toolbox once more, and removed a small crescent wrench from the foam casing inside. Its handle was wrapped in black tape, the kind that never held for long, but never quite let go either. He held it out. "Try not to kick this one," he said. The sergeant reached out and took it, his fingers wrapping around the metal like someone being handed more than a tool, a weight, a responsibility. He nodded once, then again. He stepped back without another word. From the far end of the room, near the folding chairs, the private who had asked Bruce his name earlier now stood taller. Not straighter, just taller, like someone who had learned something worth standing for. Across the hangar, a technician peeled a strip of gold tape from a nearby console and walked toward the table near the entrance, the check-in station. He placed it on Bruce's badge, right over the old, faded clearance code. The gold gleamed against the dull plastic like sunlight on worn brass. Behind the glass window near the exit, the gate clerk who had let Bruce in that morning now stood with a quiet, unreadable look on her face. She raised a hand, not to wave, but in acknowledgement, a subtle salute of her own. In the center of the hangar, the energy had changed. Not because a general had spoken, not because a policy had been written, but because one old man had shown up without expectation, without anger, and reminded them all what it meant to serve, even when no one was watching. The mission hadn't failed, because Bruce had been there. A week later, the hangar looked much the same. The same high ceilings, the same rows of folding chairs, the same faint scent of oil and steel that clung to the corners like memory. But something in the air had shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't visible. It was the kind of shift that lived in glances, in the way people stood, in the way footsteps slowed instead of stomped. It was Thursday again. The gate didn't stop Bruce this time. His badge was already waiting for him in a clean envelope at the front desk, laminated and trimmed with a small gold strip in the upper left corner. No paperwork. No delays. The clerk, now familiar, handed it to him with both hands, her fingers respectful on the edges. Bruce took it, nodded once, and clipped it to his jacket. Inside the hangar, the main relay panel sat quiet and humming, its surface recently cleaned, the casing free of dust. A folding chair had been placed near it, not out of convenience but intention, and beside it, resting on a crate wrapped in canvas, was a small black thermos, the kind that keeps coffee hot for hours. Steam still whispered from its mouth. Bruce stepped in and paused only briefly, not to look around, not to hesitate, just to breathe. Then he made his way to the panel like he always did, toolbox in hand, same measured steps, same steady rhythm. But this time, something was waiting. The young private stood nearby, already unspooling a coil of wire, hands slightly fidgety, but eyes focused. He wore no expression of ceremony, only readiness. He didn't greet Bruce like a guest. He greeted him like a man ready to learn. Bruce nodded to him, and the private nodded back, wordless but meaningful. The sergeant was there too, not near the center of the room now, but by the benches, watching, not commanding, not directing, just watching. In his hand was the crescent wrench Bruce had handed him, the handle now cleaned, the tape replaced, the edges oiled. He didn't interrupt. He didn't impose. But when Bruce glanced his way, he raised the tool slightly, like a quiet salute of steel and humility. Bruce didn't smile, but his eyes softened. The work began again, not in crisis, not in haste, but in the rhythm of something that had returned to its proper place. The private followed Bruce's lead, mimicking the fold of the cloth, the reach of the hand, the way each tool was returned to its slot, as if it had a memory of its own. At the far end of the hangar, a new sign had been placed discreetly above the tool locker. Not a plaque, not a portrait, just a strip of brushed aluminum, engraved in quiet black lettering, maintained first by Bruce Keegan, veteran, technician, soldier. No one pointed it out. No one gathered to read it. But each man who passed by ran his fingers across it once, as if checking the engraving, as if to be sure it was real. And Bruce? He stayed until the light above the panel flickered once, then steadied. Then he packed his tools, sealed the box, and lifted the coffee from the crate. It was still warm. He sipped. He stayed a little longer, and when he left, the door opened before he reached it. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from. And if this moment brought back memories you carry with you, the best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.